Hello and welcome to another segment of Western Wisconsin Journal. I'm Jamie Johnson and I'm the legal and government correspondent today. My guest is Tom, and it's Goeltz or Goeltz? Goeltz, all right. Sorry about that, Tom.
Yeah,
I should have got that while we were off camera, but Tom Goeltz, the O is kind of silent there.
Yep,
Okay, Tom, you're here because you have been termed a survivor advocate by the National Safety Council. And I want to get into that as to how you earned that title, but just to let folks know that the National Safety Council, their mission obviously is safety. They want to eliminate preventable deaths at work, in homes and communities, and on the road through leadership, research, education, and advocacy. So it sounds like you're a big supporter of their mission.
Right.
Okay.
I'm a safety consultant.
Okay, well, first of all, professionally, that's what you do for a living.
Yeah, I went to school for that. I'm a certified safety professional. I've been doing it for 32 years.
Do you want to name your company? It's kind of free advertising.
Sure, yeah, I work for Hayes Companies in Minneapolis.
Okay. Yep. And so, and your title is Vice President of Risk Management?
Yes.
So that is pretty wide range. There's many companies that have risk management, and take that to heart. But in your case, though, you're more here for the personal side of this. While you are a professional safety professional, the survivor advocate. I want to start with the first word of that. How are you a survivor?
Well, as a safety consultant, I belong to the National Safety Council.
Okay.
And it's a group out of Chicago, and they support the entire country regarding safety initiatives, both industrial and public safety. And they reached out to me shortly after my daughter was killed in a distracted driving crash. And they asked if I wanted to attend a conference on distracted driving. I had been doing defensive driving and distracted driving training and conferences, for quite some time before Megan's death. But once they reached out to me, and I thought this would be a good avenue for me to raise awareness in regards to our distracted driving epidemic.
Okay. And so, if I can ask you a few questions just about your daughter's unfortunate accident. So that was in February of 2016?
Correct, yeah, February 29th, 2016 on Leap Day.
And so are the basic factual scenario, I'm sure, has played out too many times since and before, but essentially what happened?
She was sitting in an intersection in her vehicle at a stop sign, and waiting for oncoming traffic, and another vehicle veered across the road, crossed in oncoming traffic, went into the ditch on the other side of the road, rode through the ditch, and then came up on her car and struck her car at a higher rate of speed. Her car tipped on its side. The other car went over the top of hers and into the woods on the other side of the road. The other vehicle traveled 300 and the accident report said 347 feet, and there were no skid marks. And that's the essence of distracted driving crashes, is that when they happen, usually the vehicle at fault doesn't even slow down. They just smash into the vehicles, and our death rates on our roads are going up because of it. And I'm trying, as a safety professional, I'm trying to wrap my arms around that and raise awareness with the general public, because a lot of people are driving distracted.
And that was your daughter, Megan, and,
Yes.
and she left behind your granddaughters, Paisley,
Yep.
who's now 6, and she's being raised without a mother. So what about the prosecution in that instance? There was a long delay before there was a decision on what level of charge. Is that right?
Right. It took almost a year for the accident reconstruction report to come back. There was a lot of things behind the scenes that they were the police were trying to prove. Ultimately, they could not prove that the other driver was on his phone at the exact instant of the crash. So they charged a misdemeanor because of that instead of a felony charge. And we were left with, a penalty for the perpetrator who, that we didn't feel we received justice. There was a lot of people working on it hard. The county prosecutor worked.
This happened over in Minnesota.
Minnesota and Stillwater. They did a thorough job and really tried to pick up the pieces, but there were too many loopholes that occurred in the case.
And I mean, the whole scenario, this wouldn't even be possible 20 years ago because there wasn't widespread usage of cell phones like there is now.
Right.
And so like with all of the changes in technology, there's laws that get behind and don't keep up. Meanwhile, for instance, another form of distracted driving, operating while under the influence of either alcohol or drugs, that has been around for a long time, and there's been tons of legislation on that. So let's talk a little bit more about the advocate side to this, to your title of survivor advocate. I take it that, to what extent have you been doing advocating then on this issue of distracted driving?
Well, 2 weeks after the crash, I was doing an OSHA presentation, and I included distracted driving in that course, and there was for some industrial maintenance people, and I told them what happened to me, and they had actually, so many of them had seen it in the news, and there wasn't a dry eye in the room. And these were union maintenance guys, tough guys. And every one of them came up to me and either shook my hand or gave me a hug and said, thanks for what I'm doing, and I need to keep up the fight. And that gave me the resolve to say, I can make a difference. I'm a safety consultant. I try to save lives. I try to prevent buildings from burning down, products from harming people, from vehicles from hurting people. And I thought, this is my calling. This is something that I can really make an impact with. So we have customers that are anywhere, from small businesses to Fortune 500 companies. And I go around the country, actually around the world, and present on distracted driving for those businesses. I also spend a lot of time doing presentations for high schools and for churches and for Rotary clubs and for all different types of organizations.
So are you welcoming those things yet to this day?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And my company, bless their souls, they give me a pretty long leash. They allow me to take time off of work to go do a presentation at a high school, and I really appreciate that because the owner of my company says it's safety. You're trying to prevent losses in our state of Minnesota and Wisconsin and throughout the country, and that's what you do. So go do it.
That's great. So you got the full support of your employer, and they much deserve their mention. And so you have not stopped at just talking to private clubs or high school groups. You've also, though, testified and advocated at governmental level in looking at new legislation, particularly in Minnesota, correct?
Primarily in Minnesota. There's a coalition of families in Minnesota that are all victims advocates that have all lost a loved one due to distracted driving related crashes, and they've been formed for almost 10 years. I've only joined that group in the last 2.5 years, and I worked hard, going to conference meetings and Senate hearings and representative hearings there, and testified before the Minnesota Senate. I don't live there, I'm not a constituent, but I worked there. My daughter was killed there. My unborn grandson was killed there, and they've received me in open arms, and we were successful this past legislative session to get hands-free law passed. And
okay, so let's talk about that, because there's different levels throughout the country. First of all, there's never going to be a federal statute on this, or highly unlikely, just to get Congress can't even agree on simple things, let alone anything that has to do with regulating their own highways. States tend to like to do that for themselves. So then as a result, you get some states that have this level of regulation and other states that are up here. So and understanding that there was nothing 20 years ago anywhere. So where has Minnesota gone now with this idea of hands-free? What does that mean?
Well, it basically means as of August 1st of 2019 that you can't hold the cell phone in your hand anymore. You can't scroll. You have to have it mounted, and it's a one-touch feature where you turn it on, and it has to be able to be completely hands-free. So, no texting, no phone calls, with the phone up to your ear, no speaker phone while you're holding it. It has to be mounted in the vehicle. You can use GPS, but you have to do it while you're parked, and mount the phone and don't touch it till you get to your destination.
And now, so it goes into effect in a couple weeks. By the time this is replayed, it may already be in effect after August 1st of 2019, once you cross the state line into Minnesota.
Right.
Before you cross that state line in Wisconsin, what would be the law?
It depends. I mean, Wisconsin doesn't have a hands-free law. They have a law that says if you're driving inattentive, you could get a ticket for inattentive driving. They have provisions for hands-free in a construction zone. So when you go through a construction zone, I think that's laughable, to tell you the truth. So I'm driving down the road talking on my phone on Interstate 94, and I'm coming up to a construction zone, and I go, oh wait, I got to put this on speakerphone and mount the phone. Do you think anybody's going to do that?
Right.
That's a joke.
Yeah.
I mean,
but as long as cars are equipped with hands-free and they're advertised that way, and then that's almost become standard equipment now in newer vehicles,
right,
it's going to be tough to eliminate any phone usage in a vehicle. So are you satisfied this is probably about as strict as you're going to be able to get what they have in Minnesota?
No.
Okay.
No.
What do you think the next?
I'm not resting at all.
All right.
No. We introduced a penalties bill, and that was very near and dear to my heart because my daughter's, the person who hit my daughter only got charged with a misdemeanor
and
instead
60
of a felony.
days jail.
60 days in jail, 2 years probation, $500 fine, 20 hours of community service, has to be law-abiding. I mean, it's basically a slap on the wrist for killing 2 people.
Right.
So we introduced a bill so that if you seriously hurt or kill somebody due to distracted driving, you'd get a felony charge and up to 10 years in jail. That didn't get through committee. It got passed in one of the I think the House, but the Senate it didn't pass.
So is it still non-felony then in Minnesota?
It's not a felony. Unless there's something else associated with it, like speeding or drunk driving or eluding an officer or something else has to be associated with distraction.
So that's why you say you're not going to arrest until that penalty is to that felony level.
Right.
I mean, once it's to a felony level, felony is anything more than a year in jail, punishable by more than a year. Okay. So it wouldn't necessarily be a 10-year, it could be a 5-year, but something that would put a little bit more meat behind it, and obviously have a deterrent effect.
And yes, that's I think the main thing. Everybody looks at it differently. Some people are that's reactive to a situation. We want to be proactive, like with a hands-free law, which great, I get that. But some of us we look at penalties.
Right.
And for me, for example, with drunk driving, I mean, I'm a safety consultant. If I get busted for drunk driving, I'm probably going to lose my job. If I lose my job, I might lose my wife. There's a lot of things that could happen in my world that is critical to me. So I don't do that.
Right.
But a lot, if you drive around, I used to drive distracted too. I'll be honest with you. I mean, I did it just as much as the next guy or gal. Once I stopped, when this happened to Megan, I stopped cold turkey, and it was very difficult. It was just like quitting smoking or chewing tobacco or whatever you have a bad habit with. But once I quit, I noticed everybody else who was doing it. It was amazing how many people weren't paying attention.
Well,
and you see all the other cars weaving around, and
I don't think that there's a commute, and I only have a 6-minute commute, that I haven't seen somebody stopped at a stoplight and they've got the phone up there. And there's nothing more aggravating than being behind a car, the lights turn green, and you're sitting there for 10 seconds, 30 seconds, a full minute, and they're not moving.
Right.
I mean, I don't usually let it get to a minute before I get on the horn, but you know what they're doing. They're on the phone.
Yeah.
And it's one thing if, there's going to be rare instances where you got to be able to take the call, like if you're going to a place you need to turn around and go back. But again, having that hands-free option. And number two is the GPS deal. I know before cell phones, there was that technology, GPS technology. Remember, you used to buy those things. They were like almost the cost
Garmin or something.
Garmin, yeah, they were like $300, and it was the new thing. But now they're an app on everyone's phone, so nobody has to buy a Garmin anymore.
Right.
So what about those? I mean, are you fine with people, being able to find their way and having that GPS map up?
I still use GPS. So, and what I do is I when I'm parked in my driveway or a parking lot, I set the coordinates, then I mount the phone in the car, and then I turn on the volume, so I'm listening to it like a radio, and I'm looking at it like I would a speedometer. Is it a distraction? Yes, but it's a small distraction, just like a speedometer, just like a radio or a podcast or anything else would be. The problem is that people might do that, and then they get to their destination and they're not at the right place. And they're looking on their phone, they grab their phone and they're pushing in coordinates while they're driving.
Yeah.
So pull off to a safe area. Don't pull off under the shoulder. That's very dangerous.
Right.
Police officers with their lights on get hurt on the shoulders. Pull off to a parking lot or a safe area, park your
Take
vehicle,
the exit,
and make a phone call or check your directions and figure out where you want to go.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, we can still use them.
Okay. Now, you mentioned your efforts in Minnesota culminating in a new law that's going into effect this summer, in 2019. What about in Wisconsin? Where is Wisconsin at in any kind of legislation, and what role might you play there?
Well, I've talked to our local senator and representative, and they're both on board with a hands-free
That would be
bill.
Patty Schachner and
Shannon Zimmerman.
Shannon Zimmerman.
Yep, both of them.
So again, could be a bipartisan deal, right?
Right, yes. Unfortunately, in Wisconsin, in Madison, we've introduced these bills in the past, and they haven't gone anywhere. So,
Who opposes those bills? I've always been curious, because for drunk driving situations, it's kind of obvious. The Tavern League, which I qualify as the third most powerful lobby in Wisconsin. But who's opposing it when it comes to hands-free?
I think the car companies and cellular companies have lobbyists, backdoor lobbyists, and they're in speaking, to the representatives and senators behind closed doors. Nobody really opposes you. I mean, at least my dealings in Minnesota, nobody really confronted our coalition and opposed the law or the bills, and sometimes there's politics that enters into it, and the committee chairs, they want something else, and if you're not willing to give, certain politicians aren't willing to give in on certain
You don't
other
vote
things.
on this dairy bill or this road improvement, we're not going to vote on
Pass
your...
that, or we're going to throw it all into an omnibus bill, and if you don't approve everything and vote it through, then you don't get what you want. And that's what happened last year in Minnesota. It got thrown into the omnibus bill, and the governor vetoed it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
This year it went through separately, and the governor signed it.
So we talked about how it's difficult to get traffic laws at a federal level. Even the speed limit thing, when I remember back in the 70s when the fuel crisis and states were going to be denied their funding. When they're denied their funding, then they tend to change their laws. But nobody's doing that when it comes to the cell phone usage. So now individual states are up to regulating themselves. And if the state doesn't do it, what can local governments do? Because if it's hard enough crossing a state line to know what their traffic laws are, what about individual municipalities having different laws when it comes to cellular phone use?
Right. A lot of states where the legislature hasn't come through have enacted local ordinances at the city level. In Arizona, they were doing that. In Phoenix and in Tucson, they had hands-free laws. And in suburbs, so you drive from one suburb to the next, and some of them had it, some of them didn't. That's why it's important that the state level really get engaged. I haven't seen any traction yet at the state level, so I'm introducing a local ordinance here at the City of Hudson for hands-free, and hopefully that'll expand out to other cities in St. Croix County, eventually the St. Croix County, and then eventually the state of Wisconsin.
Have you contacted anybody on the St. Croix County board as to?
Not yet, but I plan on doing that once things get approved here in the city.
And we kind of skipped over because you have your personal story, and people say, okay, well, that was one person. But what are the statistics showing as far as how frequent this really is?
You know, the president of Federated Insurance out of Owatonna, Minnesota, a large insurance company, testified in Minnesota that in 2018, 50% of all their commercial auto losses were due to distracted driving. 50%.
Wow.
So you see statistics from 2015 and 2016 that may say 5%, 10% are distracted driving related. There's only a couple fatalities in each state. At those years, the police reports that all those statistics are based on didn't even have questions on them about, you know, was the person using their cell phone?
Right.
Were they driving distracted? They didn't even have questions for that. They've just, in some of the states, they still don't. But they've been introducing some of that in their accident investigation reports now, so the statistics are starting to get more reliable.
Procedural questions, because for enforcement of this, can a Minnesota police officer after August 1st pull somebody over if they have their hand up to their ear?
Primary offense.
Okay, primary offense, and thank you for bringing up that term, because we had this issue with seatbelt, and we still have it as only a $10 fine in Wisconsin.
Right.
But its question is that enough probable cause for the officer to pull you over if that's the only violation they see? So when it comes to holding a cell phone, that will be enough for the officer to pull you over.
Right.
And of course, if you've got other contraband or doing something else wrong, you'd be subject to other laws. But where we're going, what about then accidents? Because accidents occur, just like in your daughter's case, where it's very tough to prove the exact instant of whether the phone was being used. At what point will can the officer confiscate the phone? I mean, do you need a search warrant in order to get the phone?
And I don't refer to them as accidents. I refer to them as crashes.
Okay.
Because in an accident is preventable. These are preventable incidents. We all make choices to use our phone, just like you make a choice to drink and drive.
Right.
It's the same. The penalty should be the same. I mean, just think if all the people that are driving distracted were driving drunk.
Right.
You know, 50% of people driving distracted, now they're driving drunk. And that's what, you know, when they do the tests in closed courses with cones and they have a drunk driver, he hits the same amount of cones as a distracted driver is.
Right.
When you're talking on your phone or even, you know, texting, it's just like driving .08 drunk. And that's what I think when I'm driving around and I see all these people distracted driving, that they're all drunk. So I got to stay away from them.
Right. The statistic I saw that the average text takes like 2.8 seconds to read. Mm-hmm. And so in those 3 seconds, if you're traveling at 55 miles an hour, that's 88 feet per second.
Yeah. It's like a football field.
You've just traveled the length of a football field in that time it took you to read that text.
And you know, we're increasing our speeds. In Wisconsin, we raised our interstate speed to 70 miles an hour to match Minnesota and some other states.
That's now well over 100 feet per second.
Right. So yeah, I mean, you narrow down that the time frame that it takes to travel that distance. The problem is our cars are not designed to crash at 70 miles an hour. They're designed to crash at 30 to 50 miles an hour. So if we've got somebody texting or on their phone and they're cognitively distracted and they may be looking out the windshield, but they're not really seeing what they're looking at, and all of a sudden there's a slowdown in traffic, it's rush hour, traffic's getting backed up, they smash into the pack at 70 miles an hour. That's why people are dying. We're above 40,000 deaths in the United States on our roads for the last 3 years. That's the first time we've been above 40,000 in a long time. Our death rates were going down for 53 years, and now they're going back up.
Right, and they're going back up, and they're differentiating, though, between the drugs or the alcohol and distracted, whereas drugs and alcohol deaths have leveled off and stayed level,
Right.
but it's the distracted driving that's still taking off. And you mentioned how if you have even 4 or 5-year-old stats, they might show less than 10%, but if you update it to current levels, it's going to be rising to a much higher percentage.
Right, right. There's 19 states now that have a hands-free law, and 15 of them have had it for quite a couple years.
Right.
And the statistics show that the fatalities due to distracted driving decrease by 15 to 20% on average. And if that translates to 200 people that get killed in Wisconsin due to distracted driving, 15 to 20% of that is 30, 40 people.
Right.
If one of those people happened to be in your family, I think you'd appreciate this law.
Exactly.
But that's the thing. We'll never know who it really protects. That's the problem in safety. When we enact a safety regulation or a law or anything like that, you don't really know who it protects, because that crash doesn't happen.
Right.
That injury, that fatality doesn't happen.
And public awareness is really important, and that's what you're trying to do now, is
Right.
to get out there, and that's why you do these speaking engagements, and your employer affords you that opportunity.
Right. Well, in the school district here in Hudson, almost everyone in Hudson will, even these kids that are going to school, will drive in Minnesota. They need to be aware of the law there, because it's considerably different than Wisconsin. So that's why they wanted me to come in at the mock crash that last about a month ago and present on some of the law changes.
They usually do that just around the time of prom,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Which is another good time, because we have too many fatalities that happen at that time. But
Right.
all right. Well, how do people contact you if they want you to come and speak to their organization, whether it's a church or a school?
They can reach out to me through Facebook. I've got or LinkedIn.
And you spell your last name Goeltz.
Correct. Yeah,
right.
and Tom or Thomas on there. Or they can call my cell phone, and that's 651-357-6490. Or they could email me at Hayes Companies. They could contact me through the website.
You don't have your own website set up?
No, I don't.
But
Not yet.
and I don't see a contact button here from the National Safety Council. Will they be doing that at some point for their advocates, maybe?
Yeah, and if you contact the National Safety Council, they will contact me. They do all the time.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, for news stations, national news stations or local news stations have reached out to the National Safety Council, and they backdoored it.
Well, I really appreciate what you're doing, and thank you for being on the show.
Thank you. I appreciate
And
you
I
letting me come
remember,
on.
I remembered you from when you came and spoke to our Rotary group. It was a very powerful talk that you gave, and I hope that you keep doing this. So.
Yeah, I'm trying to change behavior one person at a time. And it's difficult, because I don't want it to take decades.
Right.
If we kill 40,000 people a year, if it takes 10 years, like it did in drunk driving or seatbelt laws, that's 400,000 people in the United States and several thousand people in Wisconsin. That's, as a safety professional, it's not acceptable. Right. Hands-free is not a perfect law. What I tell people is hands-free is not risk-free.
Right.
When I do my presentations, I tell people, don't use the phone in the car. But the legislatures aren't interested in a total ban. They want to do something that the other states have done, and they've done hands-free. So it's better than nothing.
Sure. All right.
Thank
Well,
you.
Tom Goeltz, thank you for being on the show. And thank you for watching another segment of Western Wisconsin Journal. Keep watching.